shadows sway and seem to say, tonight we'll pray for water, cool water, water. And way up there he'll hear our prayer and show us where there's water, water, cool water, clear water, water.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We are being taped today. Our good friend from community television, Peter McGettigan, is back there with a camera. Wave, Peter. Are we ready to start the program? Okay. So welcome to the Democratic Women's Club of Santa Cruz County. I'm Judy Warner, your DWC president. The focus of our program today is water. This is an overview of what's happening locally to plan for an environmentally sound, safe, reliable water supply, needed right now and in the future. More than half of Santa Cruz County is served by two water agencies, the City of Santa Cruz and the Soquel Creek Water District. As part of their planning process, they've been studying the possibility of a jointly operated desalination plant that would provide water in times of drought and help keep our aquifers full and healthy. If you follow the news, you sometimes see the silly headline, "Water Wars." Well, there are no water wars here. There is a water management planning process going on, with many meetings and opportunities to engage in public discussion. A normal time for citizens to ask questions and get information from the experts. Our experts today are Bill Coker, Toby Goddard, and Dan Kriege. All of them have sterling credentials. Bill Coker is the director of the Santa Cruz Water Department, the City Water Department. Toby Goddard is an award-winning water conservation manager. And Dan Kriege, past chair of the California Water Commission, is a civil engineer specializing in groundwater protection. Now, we'll have some time at the end of the program for questions, but if you want more information or think of other questions later, go to the website, www.scwd2desal.org. You'll find answers to frequently asked questions, fact sheets, and project reports. It's an excellent resource. Now I'm going to turn the program over to Carol Fuller, DWC's program chair. Carol organized this meeting today, and we thank her very much.
Why don't you gentlemen come up here and sit down, and we'll just commence. And I guess the logical order, but I'll take direction. I guess the logical order is to start with you, Bill Coker.
Sure.
And then maybe Dan Krieger, so the two representatives of the two water districts, and then Toby Goddard, okay? All right. So without further ado, Bill Coker, the director of the Santa Cruz City Water District.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you all for inviting me. It's always nice to come and speak to people that care about the subject. We don't always get that. We have Water Commission meetings the first Monday of every month at 7 o'clock in council chambers, and often there is no one there. No one but the commission and me and a couple staff members. So it's always nice to get out and talk to people that care about the subject. The state of California, the western United States, is really very much like the city of Santa Cruz in its water woes. It's going to be the next big crisis after energy, and maybe worse than energy, because we are hurtling towards trouble. Let me talk just for a second about the state. The state of California in the late 50s, formed a water board. It's now called the State Water Resources Control Board. At the time, it was just called the State Water Board. And the responsibility of that group was to safeguard the water supplies for the good of the people of the state of California. And notice there, I didn't really mention that part of the charge was necessarily to protect the environment, but to protect the water supplies. And they built a water supply system which, in concert with the Central Valley Project, provided all of the needs of all of the residents for all of the purposes for water throughout the state. And at that time, the population was about 17 million people. So the state now has a population of about 37 million plus, and it's moving toward a population of more than 40 million by 2020, with pretty much the same water supply. The Delta is in crisis. The Colorado River, which supplies water to 6 states plus Mexico, is 12.5 million acre feet shy of meeting all of its contractual obligations. 12.5 million acre feet. And an acre foot, by the way, is if you filled a football field a foot deep in water, that's 1 acre foot. So think of the Cabrillo Stadium there, filled to a foot deep, times 12.5 million. That's how much short the Colorado River is. It barely makes it now out of this country. So water's a big deal. Now let's switch to us. Same story, unfortunately. We have the same story. What happened in the state was, back in the 50s, when ag couldn't meet their water demands through flowing supplies, they began to pump wells much harder than they should be pumped. And they actually brought the surface of the earth about 50 feet lower than when they did it through land subsidence. If you do that near the coast, Dan is probably going to explain to you, the consequences are much different. And since we have a coastal basin here, and we draw from it as well as Soquel Creek, we're a very small player, but that's obviously of critical importance to us. Moreover, our flowing supplies are in some danger now of diminishing significantly because there are moral, environmental obligations we have to meet. And we haven't been doing a very good job, nor has the state of California. When surface water supplies were developed in the city of Santa Cruz, as well as the state of California, they were developed kind of on a principle of mining. And the principle was not so much sustainability, but more it was efficiency of extraction. Just like in mining, you just want to get the ore out and you want to do it as efficiently as possible. We took care of consumptive uses in this area, the water that you and I use, the water that businesses use. We took care of that pretty well until the mid-'70s when we realized, oh, guess what? We've outgrown this supply by a lot. If we have a drought today that looks like 76, 77, and we are going to meet the environmental obligations that we all value to protect the aquatic habitat, we're going to be 40% short of meeting average annual demand. The city took it upon themselves 12 years ago to come up with a plan that integrated 3 strategies. The first was conserve water to the maximum extent possible. The second was come up with a reasonable reduction in supply that we could endure in drought events, that wouldn't bring us crashing down economically or otherwise. And lastly would be to develop a supply, a modest supply, that would allow us to achieve whatever level of water security we chose. And by the way, we chose to be 85% secure. In other words, if we had a drought like 77, we would be 15% short. That isn't to every customer class. It varies from customer to customer, but Toby could explain that later. And then lastly, we looked at a number of supply options. We actually have, over the last 40 years, looked at a lot of supply options. And what won, after everything was said and done, was to build a 2.5 million gallon a day desalination plant, and that would be used by the city in drought conditions only to allow us to keep rationing to only 15%. And then we'd share it with a neighbor, with our neighboring district, Soquel Creek Water District, who would share in the cost of building it, share in all the costs of exploring it. And they would use it in all other years so that they might rest wells and try to restore their basin. That is the arrangement. That's what we've been up to. That's really short, but I'm going to quit with it being short, because I think the sooner we get to questions, the more likely we're going to answer the things that you're wondering about. So let me turn it over to Dan Kriege, who is a director of the Soquel Creek Water District. And let me correct one thing. Dan was operations manager in Santa Clara Valley, not Santa Cruz.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. As I drove from Capitola to here along the beach, I must say there's a lot more people along the beach than there are here this morning. But you did show up, and I appreciate that. I represent the Soquel Creek Water District. We're a government agency, and we serve water from basically 41st Avenue to a little beyond La Salva Beach. The water, we serve about 45,000 people, and although our name is Soquel Creek, we take no water from Soquel Creek or any other creek. All of our water comes from groundwater. We have about 17 wells, and we pump that groundwater to meet our demands. But it's not only us, but we share that groundwater with others. The city of Santa Cruz uses the water to serve their needs in the Live Oak area, and they hope to increase that pumping from the groundwater during periods of drought to help meet the demand. We also share the basin with Cabrillo College, Aptos Golf Course, a number of municipal water agencies, and then a number of private well owners. So we are just one of a number of people using this groundwater. And we talk about groundwater, it's really not, there's not big caverns under the ground that's this water stored in. These are called aquifers. They're water-bearing stratus, and it's gravels and sands that this water actually falls as rainfall up in the mountains and slowly moves some of those mountains down through our area and out underneath the ocean. In the book, 2 Years Before the Mask, the author talked about his ship that was anchored off Monterey, and they could actually find fresh water out in the ocean. That's probably these aquifers actually outfall in the Monterey Canyon, and the water was flowing up to the surface as fresh water. Of course, about 100 years ago, we came up with a deep well pump, so we now started to collectively pump a lot of this groundwater. And really, it's the storage of the water is the water that's stored between little grains of sand and stones and pebbles and things like that. And as it moves through, we pump that water. And of course, as we pump it, in order to get the water out, you draw the water level down. And as you continue to do that, the water level keeps drawing down. And what we've been doing, along with our neighbors, is over-pumping this basin. And over 20 years ago, we recognized that we had to slow down, and we couldn't continue pumping the way we were doing. So that we formed a committee and said, okay, this is a 25-member citizens committee, and said, what should we do? They looked at the idea of taking water out of Soquel Creek. It's a good idea, but with the regulations and the requirements for fish and just a long-term effort to get permits, we let that project go by the wayside. We came up with another project where we would take water from the Pajaro Basin. At that time, the Pajaro Valley Water Management Agency was planning on building a pipeline from Watsonville to Gilroy, and they would connect to another pipeline that exists over there where they could take water from the Central Valley. This all sounded good, except the pipeline was going to cost about $135 million. That killed that project. We also looked at wastewater reclamation. We don't have most of our area is sewered, but a lot of it isn't. So we don't have a big supply of wastewater, but there is a supply, but we don't have a big demand for it. The only demand we could really find, because we have very little agriculture, practically none, was the Aptos Golf Course. We talked to them about using reclaimed water in the golf course, and they listened. They didn't sound too enthusiastic. And the problem is that water was going to cost us about $10,000 per acre foot, which is a pretty substantial amount. So after that committee finished their study, they came up with really two basic ideas. One of them is maximize conservation within a reasonable cost, and also build and find a water supply, additional water supply, alternative water supply. And what they came up with in their recommendation is what the city came up with, basically, to build a desalinization plant. And they said, if you don't find this additional water supply, you're going to have to cut back dramatically the amount of water you're using. We have overpumped the basin by about 20,000 acre-feet of water. If you go past Highway 17 and drive past Lexington Reservoir, it holds about 17,000 acre-feet of water. So you can see we've created this pumping hole that's well below the surface of the ocean. And so this water that used to flow out underneath our basin, out to the ocean and maybe to Monterey Canyon or somewhere, that has now slowly stopped probably, and it's moving back. So we have a freshwater and saltwater interface that's moving towards the coast. If it actually hits the coast and comes in contact with our wells and the city's wells and everybody else's wells, you lose that basin. And so when you lose the basin, you are in dire trouble. It's very difficult to ever restore a freshwater supply in a basin that's already been treated with salt water. So in order to meet this demand to reduce our pumping from the year about 2010, we did institute a very aggressive program of conservation. And in 1995, we pumped about 5,000 acre-feet of water per year from the basin. In the year 2011, or 2010, I should say, we pumped about 4,000 acre-feet. So through conservation, our customers actually reduced their water by 20%. That was very significant. Most of it's conservation, but a lot of it could be tied with the poor economic situation in our community and elsewhere throughout the country. So basically now we've got the point of what do we do? Well, we don't have a desal plant, so the only thing we have would be a conservation effort, a very serious, in fact, a draconian conservation effort. And what we would be required to do, and our engineers are telling us, in order to recover the basin over about a 20-year period, we would have to reduce our pumping from a current level, about 4,000 acre-feet per year, down to about 2,900 acre-feet per year, or about 1,100 acre-foot annual reduction. There's several ways to do that through conservation. One of them would be that we would, for the last 10 years, we've changed out hundreds or thousands, I should say, of toilets, tens of thousands of toilets. And basically, toilets in 2000 were, most of them were using about 5 gallons a minute, and 5 gallons per flush. The new toilets have been reduced to about 1.3 to 1.6 gallons per flush. So that's had a big impact. And what we did was say, in 2004, we said, okay, there's no more increase in water. If you want to build a home in our district, you have to find enough toilets to retrofit those toilets so that the amount of water that you are going to use has to be equal to, actually it's 120% of the amount of water you're going to use. You have to retrofit enough toilets that your demand would be equal to the number of toilets. And it cost about $6,000 for a homeowner to actually accomplish that and retrofit enough toilets. So what we have done, we've also had a very aggressive program, like the city of Santa Cruz. We'll give you a rebate if you change your toilet out. We'll give you a rebate if you change out your washing machine. We'll give you a rebate if you get rid of the turf, or if you want to put a tank outside your home and collect rainwater. We'll give you a rebate to help buy that tank. So we have all these programs going on, but we've reached the point that we've kind of picked the low-hanging fruit, the less expensive programs. The new programs are much more expensive. And it's current estimates that if we, and some of these are my numbers, but if we had to take all of the toilets within our district that now basically use 1.3 to 1.6 gallons per flush down to, say, under 1 gallon per flush, we would save about 200 acre-feet of water per year, and that would cost about $12 million. It's not inexpensive. And then if we told everybody, okay, you cannot use any more water outside your home. Your irrigation has to come from elsewhere. So if we provided everybody with a 5,000-gallon tank to try to catch your rainwater, that program, giving everybody a size tank, would cost about $32 million. So these are not inexpensive processes. There's other things too we could do, but they're all as expensive, if not more expensive. So basically we're telling people, if we have to cut back to 2,900 acre-feet, there's going to be a serious reduction in the amount of water you can use. You can't use water outside. Do we terminate all irrigation of parks and football fields and playing fields? Do they have to be replaced with artificial turf? And so and of course, the impact on business is significant. If you own a laundromat and you're told to cut back 25%, how do you do that? Well, you shut down 25% of your wash machines, I suppose. And if you're a business like a restaurant or a hotel, they don't have a lot of slack, so they are really in trouble. So if we could achieve this reduction of 1,100 acre-feet per year by conservation, it would be draconian, and there's really no slack in that. If something happens and if the situation within our country, especially California, where they're saying you'll probably have less rainfall in the future, or we may have wetter wets and drier dries. And so if we have to cut back even more, it means within the home that you would have to actually start reducing the amount of water you use. And this is truly life-changing situation that we'd create. Now, what's our option? Well, the only option we've come up with is a desalination plant, and Bill kind of explained that a little bit. We would get a minimum of 1,200 acre-feet of water per year, and then during years where the city wasn't using the water, we would get more. And what we would do, we would rest our wells. Another big advantage of a desalination plant would be that the plant would be flexible. And if the weather changed, whereby we had less rainfall and we needed more water, we could probably run the plant extended periods of time and actually save more water. But the bottom line is we have to take significant steps to protect our groundwater basin. We can't afford to let it go salty. And we don't have any idea where the saltwater interface exists today, so our only really option is to now take a stand and reduce our demand, and it'll take us 20 years to do that. And so we think that the desal plant is probably the major option. Now, there's, another idea of taking some more water from the city of Santa Cruz during the winter months. We encourage that. We think that's a good idea. But the attorneys who handle these water rights issues telling us it takes 20 years to truly get a water right through the state anymore, through the agency that Bill mentioned. So we see that as a potential supply, but we don't see that as a current or initial supply. So basically, again, we end up with a need for a desalination plant. Thank you. Toby Goddard is really the guru right now of water conservation. And we have a similar person, Ron Duncan, and Ron and Toby work together to have programs that really save as much water as we can. So we really appreciate Toby's efforts.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you all for coming today. I'm going to try something a little bit different. I appreciate all the remarks from Dan and Bill. As Dan said, my job is to design and implement programs that save water and increase water use efficiency. And the principal purpose for doing that is to minimize our need for expensive future new supply. Our programs over the last 10 years have seen about a 26% reduction, like Soquel Creek, major reduction in water use for various reasons, despite a 6% population over that time. So I think we have a pretty good track record. Now, today's topic is Our Water Future, Searching for Solutions. And it's a topic that is acknowledged to be one that is fraught with complexity. And I'd like to explore that a little today. Why is it complex? The words water conservation, I'm only going to do it with context of water conservation. Seems pretty straightforward, but what does it really mean and how is it defined? I think every one of us, everyone out here today, probably has a little bit different idea about what it means, a different perception, a different concept, but it's really not simple at all. In fact, it's complex and it's ambiguous. How has it changed over time? I'll give you an example. The term water conservation, some of you here may be old enough to remember 50 years ago meant something entirely different than it does today. It meant preserving water in reservoirs so it didn't flow to sea so that it could be used for some beneficial purpose. That's completely 180 degrees different today than it was a few generations ago. So let's start large by looking at the nation as a whole. What do they think water conservation is? In the U.S., as you know, conditions vary. East of the Mississippi, the United States is wet, water is abundant. West of the Mississippi, it's dry, the weather's dry, and water's scarce. And so it's not surprising that there's no national definition or law regarding water conservation. It's only been in the last few years that EPA, in a sense, has actually created this WaterSense program, much like if you're familiar with the Energy Star labeling for energy efficient appliances and devices. Only really recently that the nation as a whole has started this program to promote water efficiency at the national level. And so I think as a nation, it's an interesting term. I want to share with you this report that just came out a month ago that looked at laws and policies. This was done by the Alliance for Water Efficiency and, if I have my glasses on, the Environmental Law Institute. And they went state to state to look at how policies and laws vary around the nation. And what they found was, of course, a wide variation in individual states. And only two, they did kind of a report card for each state, if you will. Overall, the nation received a C in terms of its report card, and individual states varied from only Texas and California received an A for their policies and for their laws concerning water conservation. It's not surprising. Those are the two most populous states, and they're both dry states. But it did vary widely. So at the national level, not real good consensus on what that term means. Let's come down to California and what the meaning of water conservation is in California. And that's a term that's been evolving over time. Just as recently as 2009, the legislature enacted and the governor signed a new law, SB 7, that reduces the meaning of conservation down to a single metric, which is called GPCD, or gallons per capita per day. And this is really a way for agencies to understand their water consumption by defining it as how much water is used. Again, all the water in your service area over the course of the year divided by the population of your service area is what GPCD is. And they ask all the utilities to determine what their gallons per capita per day was over the last 10 years, and then to reduce it by 20% in the year 2020. So this sort of was a sea change in the framework for water conservation in the state of California. I'm not aware that other states have done this. And it's still a confusing term. City of Santa Cruz, by the way, has one of the lowest GPCDs in the state of California. The state is 192 gallons per capita per day on average, and the city of Santa Cruz right now is under 100 gallons. So we're currently less than half the state average. And yet, when you ask what's in that, it includes not just our own residential use, it includes offices and schools and parks and restaurants and hotels and other uses of water. When I tell somebody that our GPCD is in the top 5%, or actually the lowest 5% of the state, at 100 gallons per day, people don't believe me. It confuses them because they only personally take responsibility for the water they themselves think they use. And they don't think they use 100 gallons per day. So all of a sudden, California restating conservation as GPCD just makes everyone a little more confused. And they did allow for entities like Soquel Creek and Santa Cruz that have already invested heavily in conservation to not have to achieve that 20% target because we've already gotten down so far. So let's drill down now from California down to the utility level. So I work for a drinking water utility. What do we who work in the utility think of as conservation? And it was about, I want to say 15 or more years ago when many of the utilities joined together with environmental organizations and said, we need to get a handle on this. And they voluntarily came together and came up with a document called the Memorandum of Understanding Regarding Urban Water Conservation in California, and set forth a series of what's called best management practices for utilities to do. These are proven programs that will reduce water use or provide related conservation benefits like education programs, where you can't attribute a gallon to the program, but it does lead towards more efficient use of the water. And so we as utilities speak in terms of best management practices, and these include things like in our own operations, from water conservation oriented pricing or water loss control on our own miles of distribution mains, or laws and policies that prohibit water waste and enforcing that in the community. Those are all things that the utilities can do. It also means programs, as Dan mentioned, such as toilet replacement and high efficiency clothes washers to reduce actual water consumption in the residential, commercial, and in the landscape sector. And so from my standpoint, working for utility, my definition has more to do with BMPs than most people on the street. If I told people today that we had a landscape program that included 250 major sites that represented 14 million square feet of landscaping and approximately 250 million gallons of water through budgeting on all of our landscape sites, you might glaze over. But in terms of water conservation, it's been a very effective program. It's a best management practice, but that's not what probably you thought of when I mentioned that term. So let's now come down to what you might think water conservation means today. And I think this is why it's fraught with complexity. Again, I think we all have a little bit different definition. I'm going to try and put out three different, they're not definitions, but they're ideas. And to maybe entertain a little conversation about this. The first idea is water conservation is something someone else should do. And why do I say that? I think each of us individually probably senses that we're virtuous, that we don't knowingly waste water, and it's therefore must be something someone else should be doing. So I'd like you to take for a minute to just connect with your next door neighbor and ask them, are they the ones that is wasting water? Just ask your neighbor, are they the ones? And if it's not the people in this room, then is it the people outside this room? Who is it? Who is it that conservation applies to if it doesn't apply to us? A lot of times people say, I don't waste water, I conserve water, and I believe them. But it's just interesting, it's ambiguous because we ourselves don't think we individually waste water. In fact, most of us don't even really know accurately how much water we use. So how can we know whether or not we waste it? The second definition in this community in particular is not water conservation at all. It's really more of a land use ethic. And when I say that, I mean water conservation is seen as kind of the antithesis of developing new supply. And developing new supply is synonymous in some people's minds with growth, with development, with sprawl. And so in their minds, they think conservation is the antidote for this. If we save water, there'll be less traffic, there'll be less development, there'll be less pressure, there'll be fewer students. And I think a lot of people see water through the prism of land use, unlike we who are in the industry who see it primarily as a public health matter. It's just a different way of thinking about it. But some people, I think, for them, it's a land use ethic, and that's a reasonable perspective. But I think that's why it's complex, because to one person it might mean not wasting water. To someone else, it means less sprawl. And finally, another definition might be, or not a definition, but just an observation, is really about what the average person might think. And I get the opportunity when I work out at the spa in your water district on 41st Avenue to sometimes hear conversations that I listen to that people don't know I do what I do. And they talk about, I used to conserve water in the drought when I was called to save water in the last drought. And what happened? They raised my rates. And so there's a certain undercurrent, if you will, of resentment about that they got burned, that there was a negative feedback for doing the right thing. They were asked to do the right thing. They did the right thing, but later, well, all they remember is the utility had to raise the rates. And so they're not so willing to be burned the next time around. And I just mention that because that is an attitude that exists out there. That there are lots of different attitudes about what water conservation is that make this complex and make this ambiguous. So I think really what I want to say here is think about that the next time somebody proposes simplistic solutions. They're probably not. These are real issues that each of us as individuals probably hold different perceptions and attitudes about water and its importance very dearly. But we serve 92,000 people, and all of us has different ideas about it. I'd like to conclude by telling you what my definition personally is. And if you look at the roots of the word conserve, it's like con, that's like with, and serve, that's like service. So I look at our job as doing it with service. And in our utility, we value efficient, responsive service. That's at the core of what we do. So our aim is to provide our customers with conservation programs and services that help them lessen their water use, one customer at a time. And so with that, I'll take any questions or turn it back to you.
Yeah. Let me take questions. I have a solution for the individual educational component of this, because people don't know how much water they use, and I don't, is we need smart meters for water. Oh, no. This'll work. Yeah, I don't know, maybe there's some way we could monitor our water use, a little gauge outside the house. I would like to exercise my prerogative, which is why I want to take the questions, to give you the first question, and I want to ask Dan. When I've tried to think about this, and I've been slowly trying to educate myself, I understand that you need the water 30 years ago. You don't need it now, you needed it a long time. You've been overdrafting the aquifer. And then I keep hearing saltwater intrusion is knocking at the door. So my first thought was, well, why is it always so vague? It's right out there, but when is it coming? And then I was out at somebody's house who has a really beautiful land out in Zayante with private wells, and he happened to mention that he sold his water to Crystal Springs Reservoir. And I went, and insulted him, and you're selling our water? And so then I mentioned it to somebody else connected to county government, and I said, well, so how, there's all these private wells, that's just why you don't know how soon saltwater intrusion is coming, but they're not monitored in any way. So, and I understand there was an effort to do that, and people became Tea Party people right away, that if you monitor our well, next step is you'll take our water if you know how much we're using. And in fact, we might be selling it out of the county. So I guess my question to you is what kind of control what kind of knowledge do you have about the other straws in the aquifer? And do they have any obligation in replenishment or, vague, I know, but.
it's not so much vague, it's right on point. If you have a private well, you can take the water from the ground or from your supply and use it on your property. A water district like us, we can take water out of the well, but it's an appropriative right, more or less. We have a right to do it, but the private well owners have first priority. Now, we do have a pretty good estimate of how much water they use, but we really have no vehicle to say to them, you have to cut back. Now, what we're trying to do, in a small sense, is let them know what is happening. We're going to encourage them to conserve water. We talked about the point of providing them with the low flush toilets and a whole array of things to kind of reduce the amount of water they take. But having control over them would take a lawsuit where you'd go to court and everybody would be told how much water they could use. Those take millions and millions of dollars and tens of years, yes. But as far as that interface is concerned, there's no real scientific way to determine where that is right
And how
now.
far many years away is saltwater?
We don't know. That's the big question. So that's why we're saying, okay, we've reached the point, we've overdrafted the basin, we've got to take action now.
So for the other questions, would you just name who, I'm going to repeat them for community television, which is taping this. Would you just direct it to someone, your question? So, gentleman right here.
How much private water is taken compared to?
How much of is private water, a percentage maybe?
Our best estimate is that we take about 2/3 of the water and the private take the other third of it. And the private would be including City of Santa Cruz, Cabrillo College, and others.
Rochelle?
This would be for Toby. When you mentioned 192 per capita in the state and 100 gallons per capita in Santa Cruz, is that a per day number that we each use, or just to give the context of what that is?
The question is, the state average of 192 cubic meters or whatever, and our use here in Santa Cruz of 100, about 50%. And is that per day? Am I?
Yes, it's gallons per person per day, and it's simply the arithmetic answer to how much water is produced on a daily basis, about 10 million gallons every day through our water treatment plant, divided by the population of our service area, which is presently about 92,000 people, but is expected to go to about 100,000 people. And that 100 gallons per day essentially breaks down to about 2/3 residential, so in your home, on average, about 60 to 65 gallons per person per day through all the individual uses, including outdoor uses, which tend to be only during the dry season, but averaged over the year. And the other 30 gallons tends to be commercial, again, like schools, parks, office buildings, hotels, restaurants. For instance, this building, if someone were to use the bathroom in here, we wouldn't normally count those gallons, but we use them in other buildings. And so each of us uses water outside of our home. And then the last component of that is actual system losses, water that is treated and enters our distribution system, but for various reasons doesn't actually reach the consumer or isn't recorded. So all of those uses equates to about 100 gallons per person per day.
And just a quick follow-up. When I get my water bill from the city, it states how much water we've used as a household. The problem, though, is there isn't another number to kind of put that number in context. So I don't know if I'm above or below, and I'm just wondering if there's a way the city could maybe put the 100 per capita number, just so we know, are we in the ballpark in terms of the average?
Can you repeat that in some way for the camera?
Sure. How is the average person to know what they use and whether their use is average or above or below? It's a great question. Most utilities measure water actually in totally different units. We measure water use in cubic feet, and we bill for water use in 100 cubic foot increments. And I dare any one of you to tell me what that is. It's 748 gallons, but what does it look like? It kind of looks like the amount of water in the fountain just outside this building. But what we are doing actually is converting how we express it on the bill. Now, we're actually moving towards converting it in how many gallons you used in this last billing period. Everybody tends to use water for the same general purposes indoors, for washing and bathing and toilet flushing and laundry and for cooking and cleaning, same basic uses. The variations tend to come in residential use on your yard and what kind of landscape characteristics you have. How big is your yard? How do you have it landscaped? Do you have an irrigation system? How do you water it? Who manages the water? Who controls the controller? That's where you get the variation. So to answer your question, the difficulty of comparing one customer to another is that we all have different yard sizes and different households. Water utilities don't tend to know how many people are in your property, which is another strong driver of use. So making comparisons to make it easy for you as a consumer to know is difficult for us as a utility to do.
I think the question basically is what's happening in the La Salva Beach area, and is there a greater concern or less concern? And in some ways, I didn't even get to that because we had limited time. In the La Salva Beach area, underneath that area, this is it's sand. It's called Aromas Red Sands. And there's now a saltwater wedge that goes underneath the coastline. Now it's deep. It's very, very deep, like 600-800 feet. So you can pump the water above that and you have fresh water. But if we continue pumping that, we're going to let that wedge move in and it could start destroying other wells that are near the coast. So now, you mentioned the word reservoir. There is no reservoir in the La Salva Beach area. What there is a groundwater reservoir. And that groundwater reservoir and that water that's in that aquifers basically has a lot of chrome-6. And we are going to be told very soon that there's conditions on how much chrome-6 you can have in drinking water, so that we're going to have to start treating that water along with any other water supply because it does have this chrome-6, and it's an issue that we have to address.
Okay, should I answer the first one first? And maybe I'll have Toby talk about how much we spent on conservation, but I can tell you this, we have a 4-person conservation staff that works full-time. They spend, their annual budget is $2 million? About $1 million a year, and has been for many years. The second question, though, the first question, it's a legitimate question. We get a lot of rainfall a year. It's a very good question. Is this really a wise thing to do when you get 54 inches of water that falls in the watershed annually? I would point out that the variability in rainfall in this area is extreme. It is extreme. This isn't actually kind of an arid region, and we don't have summer rain, as you know. And so that means that whatever falls, if we're not able to maintain stream flow throughout the year, the only other way to do it is with storage. If it falls, if you get 54 inches a year, we don't have a problem. But when we get 16 inches a year, like a 77, and you get it a couple years in a row up in the watershed, we do have a problem. We don't have adequate storage. Something has to happen to change that. The city has looked at a lot of different options, and we've done so over 30 years. 26 of them I've been at the helm. And through all that, we've looked at reservoirs, we've looked at catching fog, we've looked at new groundwater. We've looked at all different kinds of conservation programs, most of which have been implemented. The extent of options that we've explored is very, very broad. And desal came up the winner, and it came up the winner for a number of criteria that are listed in the Integrated Water Plan, and I'd be happy to provide that. But your question is a good one. And it's a question the community asked itself. I'm not patronizing you, I'm telling you, it's a good question. It's a question that the community has been asking for a long, long time. And a lot of members of the community, you see it in the letters to the editor, they're still asking it. Why not just build, we heard it today, why don't you just build another reservoir? It didn't win, and it didn't win for a number of reasons. And I would encourage you to look at the Integrated Water Plan that's online and look at why desal turned out to be the option this community chose to pursue.
Let me ask, SoCal Water District also spends literally hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on conservation. One of the things we did a few years ago, we spent, I think it was close to $400,000 of district money just going out and retrofitting toilets. And so it's those kinds of things. And as I mentioned earlier, if we don't have an alternative water supply, if we go to a drought reduction, reducing water by 1,100 acre feet, then that's going to cost us about $12 million for toilet retrofit, $32 million to put out storage tanks, $4 or $5 million worth of labor each year. That's pushing $50 million. Now, our share of a desal plant is also about $50 million. And the question is, do you want to build a desal plant where you have the water and you have water to meet the needs, or do you want to go to a conservation program where you don't have the water, and if you think the water bills went up the last time we had a reduction in water, they're going to go up astronomical in the future.
All right.
So the question was, it was a fairly broad question, but if I can boil it down, Jack, and correct me if I didn't get the flavor of this, but the question is, why isn't there more of a regional approach? Because if there were more of a regional approach, there is potentially enough room in the underground aquifers that we could store there. And if we could just figure out how to move water from Santa Cruz down to there, restore that aquifer, it could be of greater benefit to the region. But we're not approaching things regionally. We're approaching things as individual water districts. And that's hindering that effort. My answer to that, Jack, is that we're doing a lot to break down those regional barriers. We currently have an integrated regional plan that is state funded, and all of the water agencies, all the major water agencies in Santa Cruz sit on that. And there are a number of things that we're all investigating that are going to move water from here to there. Currently, I don't know if you saw this in the paper this morning, but sitting right off Graham Hill Road in Paws Temple Pines area, Scotts Valley had a well fail. And they're not able to deliver anything but indoor water use for some time now. They touch Scotts Valley. Their boundaries touch, and our boundaries touch. And we have no way to move water from our district or Scotts Valley we don't have the ability. We don't have the piping, we don't have the infrastructure. We're trying to put that in place. But as far as water rights go, it is not correct that we can move water from Santa Cruz to Soquel Creek without a change in water rights. That's what Dan's talking about. Our water rights on the San Lorenzo River are appropriative rights. Now, we do have rights on the North Coast that are pre-1914 rights, and that water could be moved theoretically as long as no one could demonstrate harm. And someone includes fish. But on the San Lorenzo River, those are appropriative water rights. We got those after 1914. And those water rights specify a place of use, and that place of use is defined. And Soquel is not in that place of use. So the only way to move water from Santa Cruz to Soquel Creek on anything other than an emergency basis, and by emergency I mean all their wells fail and we have a couple of interties and we could deliver, is to change the water right. Water rights changes in the state of California are very, very difficult, and they're very difficult on purpose. The state made them difficult on purpose because there are nefarious things that happen with the transfer of water within the state of California. And a lot of it has to do with ag, not urban, but nevertheless, no matter how honorable our intentions, it's been a very difficult thing to overcome. We're currently looking at it again. There have been 5 different engineering studies that I'm going to report out to the Water Commission. There it is again now, in June, and I can't think of the date. It's the first Monday in June, I think it's the 3rd. And I'm going to do a report to the Water Commission on the studies that have been done on that over time and why it hasn't been pursued. And we're pursuing it again. It's not going to answer the problem, but it could help. And I'm rambling, and I don't know if I answered your question or not.
You did answer that.
Your first question, I want to answer your first question and then come back to the second one. Our operations are changing to fish. We operate a surface water system 95% of our water comes from surface water supplies. 75% of our water is diverted directly off of the North Coast streams or the San Lorenzo River. And for reasons for compliance with the Endangered Species Act, both state and federal, we're having to operate in a way that depends less on direct diversion from streams and from the river. And this year is a good example. We changed our operations this year to release far more water from Laguna Creek, which is the city's oldest source, goes back to 1890. We've never done this before. And we're releasing water, in essence, bypassing water through the lower San Lorenzo River in amounts that we've not seen before. So our actual supply volumes that are available to the city are changing, and they're changing they're changing for the lower. And that's really our future. The final terms of how we're going to operate have not been defined, but we're acting in good faith in that we're doing what we can to balance, and it's a delicate balance, what the environmental needs and resources are and what the human needs and resources are. We are probably losing as much water for fish as what I've helped to try and save in water in my tenure here. It's a significant loss of supply. But like I said at the beginning, our demands have dropped almost 1 billion gallons over the last 10 years. So our demand has dropped at the same time too. To your second question, aren't we just selling the savings to development? And I have a chart I'll share with you with this later. One of the things when I got here was I knew there was a concern about water, how much water is needed for growth. So we actually started tracking new accounts and how much water they use. And so each year I get reports about if a home is built, once it's been in place for a complete year, how much water did that new home use, or a new business, or a new apartment, or something else, or increase on an existing such as a university. What are the trends? And that's one of my jobs, is to track the trends and changes in all the customer groups. And our growth rates in terms of new water need are actually significantly less than the amount of water savings we've been able to achieve primarily through, as you know, when houses are sold in our water service area, we require that people change out old fixtures. We do a lot of other programs too, but we're saving more water on an annual basis than we're essentially selling off in new development. And those rates are vary, but over the last decade, we've saved somewhere on the order of 250 million gallons of just pure programs, and we've added about 80 million gallons roughly in terms of new water need. So on balance, we've done at least 2 or 3 times better in saving water than adding new development. And I would say that we're developing the community not in a way that is growing outward, but really redeveloping old sites in our current area.
So for UC, they're going to expand, so wouldn't it be good news for you if UC was not going to expand? That would make your job easier, right? So you would be against the expansion as well, to make your job easier.
The university is an interesting customer. It's our biggest customer. They currently use about 6% of the city water supply on an annual basis. They have used approximately the same amount of water over the last 20 to 25 years, despite a doubling of their population. And that's been for a number of reasons. There is an effort being made for its current long-range development plan to expand the university, and there would be water required for that, but there have also been decisions made to somehow offset that so that whatever expansion is made by the university, physical expansion, that there's no net resulting impact on the water system from their expansion. That's kind of where we're going with that.
Right, but if they didn't expand, like they didn't get more students, then they would actually be using less water rather than keep getting more students and always using the same amount of water. So they're not really getting anywhere. They're just breaking even because every time they save water, they get more students. Whereas if they didn't get more students, they would actually be using less water.
I don't dispute that, but I don't dispute what you say.
Okay.
I don't think the university is actually subject to local planning and zoning either.
Next to LAFCO, right?
They're not subject to local, right here.
That's LAFCO.
Cynthia, do you want to say something?
Just, Bill, if you could talk about the EIR process, timeline, et cetera.
Let's take, can we take Peter's Costa and then close with that? Peter, do you? Toby answered your question. So do you want to address the EIR?
Sure. Well, you all know there's been a huge amount of interest, as there should be, in the desalination project. It is the subject of an environmental impact report that is currently underway. That environmental impact report will be completed and out in draft late summer, September, I'm going to say. I'd like to see it out earlier than that, but there are way too many of us reviewing it, and when you get that many people reviewing it, things tend to go slowly. But that draft should be out in September. We will start with at least 2 public meetings when we roll that out, after people have had a little chance to respond to it or react to it. We'll have at least 2 public meetings where we'll hear public testimony, and then the public will be given an opportunity to submit comments on it. And those comments then will be, and that period of time is something that the council and the district board are going to have to decide. It's a minimum of 30 days, and typically with something complicated, it's at least 45 days. It could be as much as 60 days, response time, a period of time to look it over and respond. And then it's our obligation to then, with our consultants, to sit down and answer those, or respond to those comments. And when those comments have all been responded to, there will be another meeting where the district board and the city council will be asked to decide whether or not they want to certify that EIR. And if they do certify that EIR, then there will be some period of time where between that and a vote that the city council has passed an ordinance mandating, and that vote would happen no earlier than June of 2014. So that's kind of the timeline on this. There's, nobody's hurrying. There's plenty of time to respond to comments, and there'll be plenty of opportunities still. The city and the district have a task force that is meeting on, and has been meeting for 4 years?
4 or 5, yeah.
4 or 5 years, monthly. We alternate the place we meet. The City Water Commission deals with this topic. There are plenty of places that you can provide input, and I encourage you to do so. But do look out for that EIR. It should be out about September. I think this website here, is it still up? Yes. Okay. That's a very good website, by the way, for just information. We've done a number of white papers, response to commonly asked questions. We try to keep people up on the progress of everything, including the EIR. So it's a very informative website if you're interested in looking at that.
Yeah, go ahead.
This concludes the Democratic Women's Club meeting and program on water. We've been listening to water experts, water professionals, talking about planning, management, and conservation, and options for our future water supply. Many thanks to our panelists, Dan Kriege, Toby Goddard, and Bill Coker. And thank you all for being with us today.